Thank you all for coming. We are so excited to have Striking Beauty coming up in a few weeks. I will say, when we first say, oh, we're having a show about tall case clocks, people sort of go, oh, how nice. But this really is a wonderful follow-up to Ma Bell, because this was the cutting edge technology of its time, much like Ma Bell was of its time. We would not be here today if it weren't for our supporters, those in the room, those in Zoom, and those who could not join us. But we do have several sponsors I'd like to thank. We would like to thank the Hess Foundation, Liza and Sky Morehouse, the George and Estelle Sands Foundation, Lisa and Michael Ullman, Robert Wilson and Michelle Plant, Baxter Construction, Fulton Bank, and an anonymous support provided by way of the Princeton Area Community Foundation. And then we also received a grant from the New Jersey Historical Commission, a division of the Department of State. So the diversity of funding, I think, says a lot about this project. And this is really one that is true to the core work. It feels like a throwback to an earlier day where we're going to look at some beautiful decorative arts. It's a true art exhibition, but it's also a tech exhibition. So without further ado, I would like to thank Beth Allen and Jesse Gordon Simmons for all of their hard work putting it together, and you will see some of these beautiful works of art. So thank you, ladies.
Thanks. Thank you all. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces out here. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. As Jill said, I'm Beth Allen. I've been the curator here for 13 years, if you can believe it. And next to me is Jessie Gordon-Simons. She is our assistant curator and registrar, and she's been at more than 10 years, if you can believe that. A little background on Striking Beauty, New Jersey tall case clocks, which covers the period of 1730 to 1830. It is the first exhibit of its kind. There has never been a show of this size of New Jersey clocks. As far as we can tell, there's been a few small exhibits of 3 or 4 clocks at historical societies decades ago. And this is really the first time you'll be able to see this many clocks made in the Garden State in one place. We were shooting for 30 clocks and we have 50 clocks, which is a lot of clocks. And we're going to talk about how we got there. They're from across the state, and that was our goal when we started out. As Jill said, sometimes you have to have a little bit of a sell to get people excited about clocks. I was telling Jessie, I told my hairdresser this week, and she was like, what? like those big clocks, like those big brown clocks? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, okay. But some things that, I'd like you all thinking about, and then we're hoping we'll communicate with this exhibit, is a little bit about what Jill touched on, that they're decorative arts, but they're the only decorative art objects that are also machines. And they're machines that still work and operate over 200 years later. Majority of the clocks in our exhibit are operational, and we'll have many of them running at different points throughout the show. And the other thing that was really interesting to us is the time period that this show will cover. Many of these clockmakers were British subjects that then became revolutionaries and then ended their lives as US citizens, which is an important, crazy thing to think about, that while the Revolutionary War is ravaging New Jersey, these clockmakers are picking up their shops, they're fleeing New Brunswick, they're fleeing Elizabeth. We'll talk about the ads that we looked at, but you'll see ads for them saying, I'm now over here. I'm now selling clocks over here if you need a clock, because I can't stay in New Brunswick because of what's happening there. And so we hope that this backdrop and context will come through as visitors make their way through our show. So how did we get to this idea? To start, the mission for our changing galleries upstairs, as I think many of you know, is New Jersey's cultural heritage. And so that's really broad. It's purposely broad, that we can follow up a tech show like Ma Bell with a decorative art show or a fine art show. So that's always our goal, to keep it as varied as we can, so we have people coming back again and again and exposing ourselves to new visitors. So the idea had been on our little spreadsheet of ideas for a long time, actually. And so we do have a running list, and I think even people in this room have shot me an email and said, what about an idea of this? And we always write it down, and we always put it on the spreadsheet and put the date that we thought of it. And so clocks had been on there, it looks like, from the spreadsheet, like from 2012 maybe. But what often happens with this list is it gets on the list and it sits there until it rises to the top or something kind of bubbles it up, a connection is made. And so clocks have been sitting there, but I think for reasons that you can all imagine, it didn't feel like something that was easily accomplished. Like, how would we do that? Where would we find them? How would we get them here? And then that all changed, as it often does, by a chance visit to an exhibit. This was the winter, this was like January, February 2020, and Jill and I went to see this exhibition at the Trenton Museum, which is in Ellerslie. And a board member there was taking us through, and we stopped by these two clocks, and I said, oh, you know, I always wanted to do a clock show. And the board member said, oh, well, if you ever do, I know the guy. There's Steve Petruccelli, that's who you need to talk to. If you want to do a clock show, you need to find him. And I said, oh, okay, great. And he said, actually, he's giving a program on New Jersey clocks in a few weeks. And so we got it on a calendar. I had a birthday party or something that day, and Jesse said, I'll go. But that clock program was scheduled for March 15th, 2020. So I think you all know what happened that week. So we never saw Steve's clock program. But as we settled into quarantine mode, I was able to connect with Steve over the phone. Just kind of a cold call out of the blue. And I said, my first question was, has there ever been a clock show? Am I correct in that I can't find a record of a New Jersey clock show? And he said, no, I don't know of any clock show. And then my second question was, do you think this is doable? Is this something we should do? And he was like, oh yeah, of course, we could totally do it. Oh, you could do it. You could just do it with my clocks. And I was like, well, we want different lenders, all these things. Like, oh yeah, of course, you can totally do it. I said, can we move them safely? Oh yeah, it's not a big deal. Everybody thinks it's a big deal. Okay. And then my last question was, would you help us? And he said, absolutely, definitely. And so that was the click that we needed to make to find the person who knew his things about New Jersey tall case clocks. Steve is the top collector of New Jersey clocks. He's also a dealer in New Jersey clocks and clocks in general. And so he's been a wealth of knowledge for us as we start to pursue these loans. Oops. So as I said, we knew we were gonna need to borrow these clocks. I think everyone knows here, we didn't have all these clocks in our collection, and that's the biggest challenge of all of Morven's changing exhibits, is that we need to borrow these objects from institutions and lenders and collectors. And so Steve basically said, I can fill in the gaps, but you want to borrow from as many places as possible, which is exactly what we thought. And it's very lucky to have a collaborator like that it wasn't about highlighting his collection, but finding others. And so the first thing we did, and by the summer of 2021, we were ready to do this, was put out a call for clocks. So we did a press release. That's a screenshot of Morven's website where he announced it. And then the key was really getting these calls for clocks in the Newtown Bee and Maine Antiques Digest, which were big collectors mags. While that was happening, we were reaching out to all of our previous contacts at New Jersey Historical Societies and collectors. If you can remember our needlework exhibit back in 2012, it was a similar model. So I was literally picking up the phone and saying, hi, remember when we borrowed that needlework? We're trying to do the same thing with clocks. Do you have any clocks? And so then they send us photos and we would start filling in the blanks there. And we were totally overwhelmed. We found over 100 clocks made in New Jersey, signed by a New Jersey maker. That doesn't even count clocks probably made in New Jersey and not signed. That was just signed. Yeah, it was more than we anticipated. I would come into 2 or 3 voicemails every day, Nebraska to Maine to Virginia. I saw your ad in Maine Antiques Digest. I have a New Jersey clock. And it was great. And, you know, as I said, we wanted a diverse list. And so we were trying to juggle museums, historical societies, and private collectors.
So as Beth said, the response was really overwhelming, and we had a lot of clocks to choose from. With all of those clocks, we had to work within some parameters really to narrow it down. The clocks had to be made in New Jersey before 1830. They had to be signed by the clockmaker, and then they were preferably in working condition so that we could have them running in the galleries. But with all of those parameters, we still had quite a few clocks to choose from still. Many of those clocks were really spectacular, but we had to choose from the best examples of each clockmaker. We also had to look at the condition of each clock and then the location from where they're going to be shipped. So how far do we have to ship these is a big consideration. Then once we had our wish list set, we had to ask for the clocks. We ended up with about 30 different lenders to this exhibition. Some of them are listed here. In negotiating the loans, we also had to address a big question, which Beth kind of touched on earlier. How are we going to move all these clocks? There were lots of phone calls to all of our lenders, lots of negotiations, making sure everybody felt comfortable lending them. But generally, blanket wrapping, the wooden case, and boxing up their works, as you can kind of see in this picture. That's sort of the way to go, generally recognized. It's also important, I don't know if you can see it here, every piece has a label on it. So you want to make sure that when you have all the pieces disassembled and they're in your storage, that you can also reassemble them. That's very important.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention that basically we would get these voicemails and these emails and we'd forward them to our trusty interns, and it would be like 10 a day, and they'd be entering them on the spreadsheet, and then we'd sit down with Steve, okay, we have 5 Jacob Hollands heads, what's the first choice, what's the second choice, what's the third choice? So they'd all be ranked by maker, and then we'd click our way through and prepare the loan agreements. So while that was happening, we were simultaneously trying to bone up on clocks and learn everything we could about New Jersey clocks, and that was where the research came in. Maybe it was lucky, maybe it's not, but there isn't that much to cover, that much to read in preparation. These are about it in terms of source material that exists. We have Drost's book on the left there, Clocks and Watches of New Jersey, obviously important, that was published in 1966. Crafts and Craftsmen of New Jersey is 1949. I'm sorry, is 1977, and then Silversmiths of New Jersey, 1949. So it wasn't a lot of new research into the people we were interested in learning about. But we started there, of course. We actually found quite a few of the clocks that are mentioned and photographed in Drost's book, and they will be on view. But it felt like we were really starting to do something that hadn't been looked at closely for actually decades. We knew one of our first stops was going to be Rutgers. We knew a New Jersey specialist named Joe Hammond, who had just retired, and while moving out of state, donated all of his silversmith and New Jersey craftsman files to Rutgers University. And he said, yep, they're all there. You should be able to get them. And so we reached out to Rutgers. But since Joe had donated his files, Hurricane Ida had hit New Brunswick. And so while the files were all safe, they had been rescued and sent off to storage before they were properly cataloged. So they said, we have them, but there's 20 boxes and we don't know what's in each box. So we said, okay, but we really need to get to these, because we knew, having talked to Joe, he's like, yeah, I mean, Joe had incredibly, in the 80s and 90s, gone through every New Jersey newspaper and every archive that he'd get into, and photocopied microfilm of each clockmaker and silversmith he could find. So basically he had done all the work, we just had to get to these boxes. And so it took 3 visits, and they would give us 4 boxes at a time for each visit, and we would go through, and we got pretty lucky. We were able to find them fairly soon. And then Jesse and I went through each box, which was organized by maker, and then we took high-tech cell phone photos of his photocopies of microfilm, which you can see how great that looks. But this was really an important piece for us because it's obviously a dated document where you know where they're working, you know, like literally sometimes what building they're across from, if it doesn't say the street number, the cross street, who they're working with. It's a revolving door of partnerships. This partnership is now dissolved, and then 2 months later you see a new partnership pop up, which is going to help us date these clocks, as their names are sometimes Wood and Hudson. Okay, well, we know Wood and Hudson are only active and these ads from these date ranges. So it was important to us, and it was worth the time. But the quality and challenges of this, Jesse will touch on later. We went back a 4th time to see original archival material at Rutgers. This is Steve and I looking at the day books for William Lupp. So William Lepp was working in New Brunswick as a clockmaker and silversmith. And it's basically just a daily ledger for the shop, which was incredible to look at. One of the themes we were wanting to be talking about and conveying is these clockmakers were doing many things besides making clocks. The average family was not purchasing a tall case clock, so they were doing watch and clock repair, but they were selling lots of everyday objects, needle and thimbles, spectacles, stirrups, saddle pieces, anything that was made of metal they could make. And so these ledgers are a way of seeing that, they're making $3 on this, $2 on this, or pounds in this case. And so we were able to view these, and these will be on view. We were lucky enough that they're allowing us to exhibit these. And that was the goal too, that we're gonna have clocks all around the walls, but we have space in the middle of these rooms to show other items. Anything else?
Okay, so Burlington County was a major craft center, and it was actually the capital of West Jersey after all. So it was on the top of our list for research visits. Our first stop was Burlington County Historical Society, and they graciously pulled out a bunch of research files and clock books, and they also showed us some really incredible historic artifacts, some of which you see here. These spoons to the left are made by Joseph Budd, who's another one of our clockmakers. As Beth just touched on, many of our clockmakers also worked in other trades, silversmithing especially, so we were hoping to show examples of some of the other trades that they were all working in. Next, we set out to explore the town of Burlington. We traced the steps of clockmakers Isaac Pearson, the Hollinshead family, and Peter Hill, who all lived in the town of Burlington. Isaac Pearson was New Jersey's earliest clockmaker, and therefore one of the earliest in the colonies. The Hollinshead clockmaking family actually intermarried into the Pearson family, as Joseph Sr. married Isaac's daughter, Sarah. And in turn, then Joseph Hollinshead Sr.'s son, Joseph Hollinshead Jr., enslaved Peter Hill. Peter Hill is the only documented African-American tall case clockmaker that we know of, and there are 6 known Hill clocks in existence. We're actually really excited that we're going to be able to show one of them in this exhibit. You'll see here we have the Friends Meeting House, which is on the left. It was a really central location in town, as it's been a feature in the city since 1683. And then on the right, you can actually see we're looking directly across from the meeting house, and you can see where Peter Hill's shop would have been. Just behind the meeting house is the Quaker burial ground. And using a map we found online, we actually located Peter Hill's grave. It's all the way towards the back, and he's got a nice new grave marker that's was placed in 2019.
Okay, the title. So you might not think that this is sometimes the hardest part, but for this show, this was among the hardest things, was to come up with a title. And you can ask Jill, because she teases, and she's right, she's teasing accurately, that curators love a colon, and they love a date range, and they love to make them way too long, which I'm definitely guilty of. And this was, I think, the longest we've ever gone without formally naming a show. And every few weeks, Jill would be like, you can't call it New Jersey Clocks. What is it called? And I was throwing everything at it. And often what we do when we're looking for titles is we love to take the titles from contemporary text. So for our needlework exhibit, that was called Hail Specimen of Female Art, which was taken from a schoolgirl sampler made in Trenton. It was perfect. I just loved it. And our chair show was
of the best workmanship.
Right, of the best workmanship, and that came from an ad. And so as we're like scrambling to get through these Joe Hammond boxes and read all these ads, I'm like, just give us another week. I know we're gonna find something. We're gonna find this language. But if you've read any 18th century or 19th century writing, it's not concise, it's very flowery, which makes it fun, but does not make it easy to come up with a title. So this is just some of the names that we went through. For a very long time, I was holding on to that first one because I loved this ad for William J. Leslie out of Trenton, where he said, not from Paris, London, or Boston, but a native of New Jersey. I mean, it's like made for me and this show and this galleries, our mission for those galleries. And if you read a little farther down, it talks about being done by American hands. And so I was really pulling for that first one, but everyone was kind of like, wait, what? Like, I get it, but it wasn't. And eventually you have to give up the ship when it's not right. So then we just went with like every pun you could think of, which you'll see. If you don't know Jessie, she's the queen of puns. And so she was just throwing puns left and right at this thing. And we finally landed on striking beauty. There's a nice pun there too, with the clock striking silver. And I think it was Jill said, beauty never hurts to have that in the title. And so we're happy with striking beauty at the end. And then we thought we'd take a minute or two to show you some of the fun things that we found or discovered along the way that we weren't necessarily expecting. So I'm going to start with this clock by Daniel Dodd of Mendham. And this is coming to us from South Jersey, but it was made obviously, oh no, it's not. Well, maybe not. It was made in North Jersey though. And I will tell you that it was like a really dreary January day, and I was working from home, and I'm kind of slugging through exhibit text, and I'm looking on Ancestry.com, and I'm trying to go through the census and find more about Daniel Dodd. And then I stumble on this newspaper ad here about how he died, which is not very pleasant, but he was scalded to death when the steam boiler that he invented and was working on exploded on the East River. So this guy was brilliant. I mean, he was known, I have a quote here. Do I have it? I mean, recognized like his father for his rare mathematical and mechanical genius. And basically he had created the first steam boiler that sailed across the Atlantic. It was the ship Savannah. And so if you know anything about Morven history, my brain went right to our own connections. We have two connections with steamships, boilers, and explosions. And these are both of them here. So it's like 4:00 now on this winter day, and I'm like, oh my God, there's no way that Daniel Dodd doesn't know Commodore Stockton. So Commodore Stockton's our third generation at Morven, and this is the USS Princeton, which he helped. It was the first group propeller steamship in the US Navy, which he does with Swedish engineer John Ericsson. And then shortly after they debut this ship, a gun on the ship explodes and kills the Secretary of State and all of these important people, including President Tyler's would-be father-in-law, his fiance's father. And so I was like, there's no way these two New Jersey guys are not crossing paths. And then a little tiny bell in the back of my brain is like, wait a second, Dodd. We have a portrait of a Dodd in the Morven collection. And this lady, lovely lady here, has been at Morven since, we have to guess, at least the 1870s, I think. And we had just done an inventory, so we had just pulled this painting out. And I think you had even said at some point, oh, we have Dodds, but it didn't feel like there was any reason to really think they'd be related. But Nancy Squire Dodd, who you can see hanging in the governor's dining room in 1957, and this is her here, and has been in third floor storage since I started working here, has never come out, is the wife of Daniel Dodd, which is incredible. So Jessie, we have our ancestry family tree here. Not only is she, but like, why is she here, right? So she's the wife of a clockmaker in Morven's collection. Daniel Dodd and Nancy's son marries Commodore Stockton's daughter, Catherine Elizabeth Stockton, and the two of them are married. They build what is now Westland, which is Grover Cleveland's home. That was built for them after their marriage, and they live down the road here. And so the Dodds and Stocktons, we have been connected to a clockmaker this whole time without ever knowing it. So she will be in the show. It's probably the only time we'll ever get to pull her out. It's just incredible that she's been up in the attic waiting for us to find her. Like, I'm still not over it.
She's biding her time.
Yes, she's biding her time. Did you hear it? She's here making puns.
All right, so sometimes we do find things that we weren't even looking for. I was actually trying to track down coins produced by Aaron Miller, a clockmaker from Elizabethtown, which was another key clockmaking center. as clockmakers were skilled in working with metals. Some, like Miller, also produced counterfeit coins. As a search result popped up, it was actually in the collection of a library and historical society in Goshen, New York. It turned out that they didn't have coins, that it was a little bit misleading how it showed up online, but they actually had this compass by Aaron Miller. So we emailed them, we emailed their historian to ask about it, and they really didn't have very much information on the compass. They had sort of a very sparse fact sheet. They were able to tell me it was donated in 1943 to the library. Beth and I, we felt that it had the significance because of its connection to early clockmaker Aaron Miller. But then we were, getting deeper into our research to write the labels, and we found that Aaron Miller's compasses actually had particular significance beyond that because they were praised by Benjamin Franklin. Not only is Aaron Miller the specific compass maker, basically, that was receiving the recognition, but this particular compass is listed as a minute compass, and that is the actual variety, which Franklin was so impressed by. And we kind of learned a little bit more online digging that the minute compass is actually very rare. This letter on the left actually mentions that Franklin wants to have a compass from Aaron Miller presented to the Royal Society of the Arts in London. Franklin actually purchased a compass from Miller in 1767 as well. And we kind of were saying it was interesting to note that the letter is from the same year that Richard Stockton was also in London. And Beth and I were kind of having fun this week, imagining the possibility of the compass traveling on the ship along with Richard Stockton to London at the same time. You never know. But with that being said, we asked to borrow the compass for the exhibition, and we're happy to say that it will be on view.
I think they learned a thing or two too, because all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, they Googled it too, and they found what we found.
So now we'll look a little bit at our exhibition design. How do we make these objects really shine in their galleries? We worked with Olivia DeSalvia for Ma Bell, and we enjoyed working with her so much that we asked her to stay on for the Striking Beauty exhibition. For design inspiration, Olivia used these really beautiful engravings, calligraphy, flourishes from the clock faces as her design inspiration. And these flourishes, these flourishes on the title are also really reminiscent of the engraving flourishes. Silver and gold accent colors are drawn from the metal clock faces and the metal works on the interiors of the clocks. Here's one of our hallway elevations. One of the ways that we're going to use those ads that Beth was talking about that we saw at Rutgers is that we're going to reproduce them in vinyl on the walls. So we'll have a few select ads around the galleries. But reproducing those ads isn't so easy. I was just saying that we're looking at a cell phone picture of a photocopy of a microfiche that's been sitting in a box since 1990. So Olivia actually really dutifully recreated these ads. She reset them. So they have a little historic flair, but then they also have much increased legibility.
And then, of course, we have to have a map. We've learned that a few shows in now that you need to have a map. People love maps, is Jill's line, and it's true. And it's also, you can't work under the assumption that when you mention Greenwich, New Jersey, that somebody knows where that is. So this will be front and center as people make their way up. And I think you'll see we did a pretty good job of getting across the state and showing the breadth of where these men were making clocks. She's got these ornaments here that then correspond to the galleries that they'll be in. So you'll actually start in South Jersey, you'll start in Burlington, make your way through Salem and Gloucester and Cumberland, then you'll be in Central Jersey, and then at the end you go back up to the top. She also did a lot of fun things with these tiny little ornaments. So she looked closely at these engraved dials that we have and pulled out these little ornaments that then will be nice graphic elements throughout the exhibit. She redrew each of these herself to make them clearer and so that we can blow them up. It's just a nice touch, I think. Typography. of course, she's so smart, it's so obvious, like, of course, Roman numerals, like, I love it. And so she pulled these from this early Isaac Pearson clock. And then one of the things that was keeping Jesse and I up at night was, okay, you're gonna have all these clocks on the wall. Where are you gonna put the label? Because if you put the label on the wall, people are gonna have to lean in, and we really don't want people leaning in close to these 8-foot tall, skinny clocks. And we thought, okay, you could put it low, but it's gonna be hard to make your way through this exhibit on this low label card that's like gotta be at your chin. And is that dangerous if that hits the clock? You know, all of that. So Olivia proposed, what if we have a handheld kind of label, a number of sheets in each room that you can walk around? And so on the right here, you're looking down at a platform that you'll be able to see the clock, and you'll be able to see the maker's name and then a Roman numeral, and then you'll be able to walk with your label sheet and say, okay, I'm looking at clock number 5, and read the text that way, which I think was hopefully going to be a more enjoyable experience and also safe for our clocks.
So another element of the design are the platforms. They'll elevate and separate the objects from the walking path of all of our visitors. And then you see on the left a design of the vertical backboards that will lend a little extra support. They're 8 feet tall. We don't want anything tipping over. We don't usually contract out platform building and special platforms, but we actually found a really great carpenter by reaching out to a network of museum colleagues, and he's actually working on our platforms and painting the blue in the McCarter Theater workshop right now. So
He's a set designer.
He's a set designer. So this is a picture of a little sneak peek of our platforms. Now for the heavy lifting. Installation is beginning. It's already begun. Our first step was to return all of the Ma Bell loans. We were sad to see them go. And then we have to start scraping all of the vinyl off the walls. So you see our little vinyl letters coming off.
Shout out to staff who helped. It's like the worst job. Everybody loves vinyl until you have to take it down.
And then simultaneously, we were doing scale tests. Here you'll see Olivia, who's brought samples, and she's ensuring the correct size of all of our panels before we incur the cost of printing everything. And Olivia also brought her vinyl sample book, which is this beautiful, colorful book, and plenty of paint chips to choose from. So you see on the right, we have a couple blue choices. We're going to go with some blue accent walls to provide contrast to all the wood grain on the clock.
And that's really it. We've got 4 weeks to go. We've got most of our clocks on site, and next week those blue platforms come in and we'll start placing them. And we hope you'll join us on the 20th at 5:30 for our opening reception. And Greer's got some great programming in the works we put out to here, but stay tuned because there'll definitely be more.